She was the kind of woman who made you forget your own name. I'm not exaggerating. The first time I saw Maya, I was standing in line at a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning, half asleep, running late for work, hair that hadn't seen a comb in 3 days. She turned around from the counter, 2 cups in her hands, and smiled at the barista like the woman had just handed her the world. That smile, God, that smile. It didn't have a single calculation in it. No performance, no angle, just warmth, pure and effortless, like sunlight deciding to wear a face. She bumped into me. Coffee splashed. She apologized before I could even register what had happened. "I am so sorry," she said, laughing at herself, already pulling napkins from the dispenser. "I do this. I walk like I'm the only person in the room." "You kind of are," I said. "I don't know where it came from. I'm not smooth. I'm the guy who practices jokes in the mirror and still delivers them wrong. But it came out clean and honest, and she looked at me, really looked, and laughed again. That was the beginning. That was before I knew anything. My name is Daniel. I'm 31 years old. I work in data analytics for a logistics company in Chicago. Nothing glamorous. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Logan Square, with a plan I've kept alive for 4 years and a coffee table I assembled wrong and never fixed. I tell you this because I want you to understand who I am. Ordinary. The kind of man things happen to, not the kind of man who makes things happen. I say that without self-pity. It's just the truth. Maya was different. Maya was extraordinary. And I knew it from that first conversation, which stretched from 5 minutes into 45, while we sat at a window table and let our coffees go cold, and both arrived to work late, and neither of us cared. She was a freelance graphic designer. She told me she worked from home mostly, traveled occasionally for client meetings, and had moved to Chicago from Atlanta 2 years earlier looking for a fresh start. She loved museums. She had opinions about architecture. She hated cilantro with a passion that was almost violent. She was funny. Not the kind of funny where someone tries to be clever, but genuinely funny. The kind where they say the true thing at the wrong time, and you can't breathe from laughing. We exchanged numbers. She texted first. 3 hours later, "I had a better morning than usual. Don't tell my coffee." 3 months later, she had a drawer in my apartment. By month 5, she had a key. I want to paint this clearly because what comes later needs this foundation. This wasn't a casual thing. This was infatuation or loneliness dressed up as love. I had been in relationships before. I knew the difference between the spark and the fire, and what I had with Maya was a fire. She made me better at my job because I was happier. She made me call my mother more. She made me finally fix the coffee table. Small things, but small things are the real measure of a person's effect on your life. My friends adored her. My co-worker Terrence, who trusted nobody, said she had good energy after meeting her once at a birthday dinner. My mother cried on the phone when I told her I thought she might be the one. I thought I knew her. I thought I knew everything. The first sign, looking back, was the phone. Not that she was always on it. The opposite. She was present in a way that felt rare in this era. She'd leave it face down on the table during dinner. She'd go hours without checking it. But occasionally, unpredictably, it would buzz and something would shift in her eyes, just a flicker, like a light adjusting behind glass, and she'd excuse herself, sometimes stepping outside, sometimes into the bathroom, and come back 5 minutes later with a smile that was 3% different from the one she'd left with. Barely different. Almost nothing. I noticed because I was paying attention. I was always paying attention to her. I didn't ask. That's what I need you to understand about who I was then. I trusted her completely. I had no evidence of anything wrong. Only a feeling I couldn't name, and I had been trained by a lifetime of anxiety to distrust my own instincts. So I told myself, she's a freelancer. She has clients. Clients have no respect for evenings. I told myself, you're looking for problems because happiness makes you nervous. I told myself a lot of things. Then came the Wednesday she didn't come home. We hadn't made specific plans, but she'd said she'd be over by 7. By 8 I texted. By 9 I called. By 10 I was trying not to spiral. At 11 she called back, voice perfectly calm. and said she'd had a client emergency, a deadline moved, a presentation pulled forward, and she'd been so deep in it she lost track of time, and her phone was on silent. "I'm so sorry, baby," she said. "I should have called. I'm the worst." She sounded like herself. She sounded exactly like herself. I said it was fine. She came over the next morning with coffee and pastries from my favorite bakery, and we sat in bed and watched the documentary, and everything felt completely normal. But 2 weeks later, it happened again. Different night. Same explanation. Client emergency. Phone on silent. So sorry. That time, something in me didn't settle. Not anger. I want to be precise about this. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't jealousy exactly. It was a quieter, colder thing. A question forming somewhere behind my sternum, taking shape slowly, like ice. Who was she when I wasn't watching? I didn't know I was about to find out. I didn't know that the answer would change me permanently, would split my life into a clean before and after, would make me question not just her, but every assumption I had ever made about what love means and what a person owes another person and what kind of secrets can be forgiven. I just knew that the next time her phone lit up on my kitchen counter while she was in the shower, and I saw the name of the contact before the screen went dark, just a first name, just 2 syllables. A name I'd never heard her mention, something in my chest went very, very still. The name was Jonah. I didn't touch her phone. I want to make that clear because it matters to who I am and to how this story unfolds. I stood in my kitchen in my socks with a half-made sandwich, and I looked at that screen until it went dark, and I made a decision, right there, not to be the person who goes through someone else's phone. I had been cheated on once before in my mid-20s, and the person who found out by snooping felt diminished by the snooping even as he was justified by what he found. I didn't want to be that person again, so I waited. Waiting is its own kind of torment. If you've ever suspected something without proof, you know what I mean. You don't stop being in love. You don't stop laughing at their jokes or touching their hand across a restaurant table or feeling your chest expand when they walk into a room. The suspicion doesn't replace the love, it runs alongside it. A cold current beneath warm water, and you're swimming through both simultaneously. I started noticing more things. Not because I was looking harder. I don't think I was. I think I had simply opened a door in my perception that had been politely closed, and now details walked through it freely. Maya received cash payments from at least one of her clients. I realized she mentioned it once, dismissively, something about a small business owner who didn't do digital. I hadn't thought anything of it then. Now it's snagged. Freelancers preferred digital. Digital left trails. Cash left nothing. Her schedule was irregular in ways that freelance work could explain, but only if you weren't paying attention to the patterns. The disappearances clustered around the same 2 days, Wednesdays and Saturdays, occasionally a Sunday evening. Never random. I realized, once I started looking, never truly spontaneous, though they were always framed as surprises. I mentioned Jonah's name once, carefully, casually, woven into a fake anecdote about a coworker. "Oh, there's this guy at work named Jonah," I said, "and he reminds me of someone, but I can't figure out who." I watched her face while I said it. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. She laughed lightly at the anecdote and moved on, which told me something too. Because if Jonah meant nothing, there'd be a flicker of nothing, the natural blankness of hearing a stranger's name. What she had was smoother than that. It was practiced nothing. 3 weeks after I saw the name on her phone, I told Terrence. We were eating lunch in the break room, and I hadn't planned to say anything, but I was carrying it like a stone, and at some point I just put it down. I told him everything, the missed evenings, the phone, the name. Terrence listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You need to see what she does on one of those nights." "You mean follow her?" "I mean know the truth." I resisted it for another 2 weeks. Then the third Wednesday came. She texted at 4 in the afternoon. "Client emergency. Probably won't make it tonight. I'm so sorry." Same words, almost exactly. The repetition had the feeling of script. I got in my car. I drove to her apartment building. She still maintained her own place, another thing I had accepted without examination, and I parked half a block down, and I sat there feeling terrible about myself and also completely unable to leave. She came out at 6:45. She was dressed differently from how she usually dressed around me. Not dramatically, not a disguise or anything cinematic, but she was wearing a blazer I'd never seen. Her hair pulled back, a large bag over her shoulder. She walked quickly, purposefully. No hesitation, no looking around. I followed her. She took the L to the south side. I stayed several cars behind. She got off at a stop I didn't know well and walked 4 blocks, and I followed on the opposite side of the street feeling insane, feeling like a stranger in my own life. She stopped in front of a building, nondescript commercial, a unit in a block of mixed-use storefronts. There was a sign above the door I couldn't read from my angle. She knocked twice. The door opened immediately, like someone had been watching for her. She went inside. The door closed. I crossed the street. I stood in front of the building. The sign was small, professional. Meridian Outreach Network, Community Support Services. I stood there for a long time. A nonprofit. She was going to a nonprofit. My first reaction was relief. So powerful my knees actually softened. Not a lover. Not something criminal. A nonprofit. She was volunteering somewhere and keeping it private, and the relief lasted approximately 90 seconds before the questions rushed back in. Why would she lie about it? Why were the lies so consistent? So detailed, client emergency, the specific language, the apologies. Why wouldn't she simply say she volunteered on Wednesday evenings? It was nothing to hide. It was, if anything, admirable. So why the secrecy? What was in that building that required this architecture deception? I waited outside for 40 minutes, cold and confused, and no longer certain my relief had been warranted. When she came out, she wasn't alone. There was a man beside her. He was about my age, dark jacket, talking to her with the ease of someone who knew her well. They stood outside the door for a few minutes, and I watched him touch her arm not romantically, not exactly, but familiarly, in that loose way people touch each other when they have history. She laughed at something he said. He could have been a co-worker, a friend, a colleague in whatever work was happening inside that building. He could have been Jonah. I went home. I didn't tell her I'd followed her. She texted at 9. Long night, finally done, see you tomorrow? Miss you. I replied, of course. Miss you too. I stared at that response for a while after I sent it. Something was changing in me. The question was no longer, is she lying? Clearly she was about something. The question was, who is she? Actually, underneath everything I've been given? Because the Maya I knew and the Maya who walked out of that apartment in a blazer I'd never seen, who knocked twice on a door like she had a code, who laughed with familiar strange in the cold, these two women used the same face and the same voice and the same brilliant smile, and I was starting to wonder if I had ever actually met the woman underneath. I found out his last name by accident. I know how suspicious that sounds, but it's true. She left a notebook on my coffee table, the fixed one, and when I picked it up to move it, it felt open to a page with handwritten notes. I wasn't searching. The page was just there, open, visible, and at the top of the page, circled, underlined, Jonah Reeves' Thursday meeting, do not reschedule. I didn't read anything else. I closed the notebook and put it on the counter, but I had the name now, and eventually 3 days later, at midnight, sitting at my kitchen table with cold coffee, I searched it. Jonah Reeves, Chicago, LinkedIn, a professional profile, program director at Meridian Outreach Network, the same organization, the same building. I looked at his profile for a long time. He looked ordinary. Glasses, professional headshot, a bio about community development and family support services. I scrolled through the organization's website. It took me 10 minutes to find it. Small and simply designed, the way nonprofits' websites often are. Meridian Outreach Network worked with families in crisis, emergency housing, legal aid navigation, support for domestic abuse survivors, help for people caught in cycles of poverty and disconnection. It was earnest and specific and clearly real. And there, on the volunteer page, listed under volunteer contributors, Maya Osei, her real last name. She'd never hidden it. It was there publicly on a website. But she'd hidden the work, hidden this whole dimension of herself from me, from everyone apparently. She hadn't mentioned it to our mutual friends either. I'd checked obliquely in conversation. No one knew. I sat with this for a long time. It still didn't fully make sense. People volunteer. People do good work. Privacy is a right, but the specific and sustained lying client emergencies, the maintained fiction across months that required explanation, that required intention. I called her and asked to talk. She heard something in my voice. "What's wrong?" she said immediately. "Can you come over?" She was there in 30 minutes. She walked in and looked at my face and sat down on the couch without taking off her coat, and I could see her reading me, assembling something from what she found. I told her I'd followed her. I told her about the building, the nonprofit, her name on the website. I told her about the name in the notebook. I laid it all out without accusation, because by the time she arrived, I'd spent enough hours with the information to be past anger. I was somewhere quieter and more frightened than anger. She didn't deny anything. That was the first thing. She sat across from me and took a breath and said, "I was waiting until I was sure I could tell you." "Tell me what?" She looked at the window for a moment, then back at me. "Do you remember when I said I moved to Chicago for a fresh start?" "Yes." That's the part one never finished. What she told me took an hour. I'm going to tell you in less time. But I want you to understand that she told it carefully, slowly, with pauses not for effect, but because some parts of it she had clearly not spoken out loud very many times, maybe ever. When she was 24, still in Atlanta, she had been in a relationship that turned bad. Not movie bad, not dramatic bad, the insidious, slow kind of bad that happens incrementally. So gradually you're always explaining to yourself why this particular thing is still acceptable. Her then boyfriend had isolated her slowly from friends, had control money, had made her feel stupid for wanting things and weak for needing them, and then alternatively made her feel chosen and loved so that she had a constant internal argument about what was real. She didn't call it what it was for a long time. She said the word quietly, almost experimentally, abuse, like she was checking how it felt to say it plainly. She'd gotten out. She'd built herself back. She'd come to Chicago, started fresh, built a career, eventually built a life. But she'd also found Meridian in her first year in the city, initially as a client seeking some resources, and had stayed as a volunteer because she understood specifically what the families walking through that door were navigating. "Jonah is my program supervisor," she said. "He runs the volunteer operation. We have planning meetings on Wednesday evenings. Sometimes I stay late when someone needs additional support." She looked at me. "I didn't tell you because I didn't know how to. Because telling you about the work means telling you why I do the work. And telling you why I do it means telling you what happened to me. And I wasn't ready to be that person to you, the person with that history. I wanted to be Maya first. Just Maya, who you met in a coffee shop." The room was very quiet. I had spent weeks imagining scenarios. Betrayal, deception, hidden relationships, a whole other life built on lies. The reality was this. She had a wound she was still learning to name, and a quiet practice of helping others with the same wound, and she'd been carrying both things privately because she was still figuring out how much of herself she was allowed to offer before the past came into the room with her. I didn't know what to do with what I felt. It was too large a fit in any single emotional category. I was relieved beyond expression. I was heartbroken for her past. I was ashamed of myself for following her, for the searching, for the midnight Google investigation. I was also, and this part was complicated, something like hurt not at the lie exactly, but at the distance it represented. Months together, and she'd kept this sealed away, not trusting me enough with even the shape of it. "Why didn't you just say you volunteer?" I asked. Even without the reason, you could have said that. She looked at me with something careful in her eyes. "Because then you'd ask what the organization does." And I couldn't talk about the organization without talking about why I cared. And I wasn't ready. We didn't solve it that night. I think people expect reconciliation scenes to be tidy, to culminate in an embrace that answers everything. Real things don't work that way. What actually happened was that we sat across from each other for a long time after she finished talking. Two people renegotiating the terms of something they both thought they understood, and then eventually she said she should probably go home. And I said, okay. And I walked to the door, and at the door she turned and said, "Are we okay?" And I said, "Honestly, I don't know yet." And she nodded like she respected that and left. I stood in my apartment for an hour. Here's what I kept coming back to. The facts of what she'd done. The facts were these. She'd lied, consistently, about where she spent certain evenings. She'd done this not to betray me, but to protect a part of herself she wasn't ready to share. She'd spent those evenings not in secret romance or anything harmful, but helping people who were living through something she understood in her body. And she'd been living with a history she'd never fully processed, carrying it alongside our relationship, trying to keep it from contaminating something she wanted to stay clean and new and unhurt. I thought about what I knew of her character. 400 days of evidence, roughly. 400 days of a woman who listened when people talked, who remembered the details you mentioned once and never again, who was kind to service workers and strangers on the street, who cried at documentary films and laughed at herself freely and texted her younger sister every single day. 400 days of a woman who had shown me, consistently and specifically, who she was. Was one hidden thing big enough to rewrite 400 days? I called Terrence. It was past midnight, and he answered immediately, because that's who he is. She wasn't cheating. I said, "It's complicated." He listened while I told him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need from her? Not is she worth forgiving. Not what would you do next. Just what do you need from her?" It was the right question, and I hadn't known it until he asked it. What did I need? I needed her to not lie to me. I needed to understand that the fiction was a temporary architecture, not a permanent disposition. I needed her to be willing, over time and at her own pace, to let me into the parts of herself she'd been keeping behind glass. Not all at once, not as a transaction or a condition, just movement toward me, eventually, in the direction she'd been holding closed. I texted her at 1 a.m, not a long text. Just, "I want to understand. I'm not going anywhere, but I need us to be able to talk about this." She replied in less than a minute, which meant she was awake, which meant she was sitting in her apartment at 1 a.m. waiting. She replied, "I know. I want that too. I should have been braver sooner." We had a long conversation the following Saturday. She told me more about what had happened in Atlanta. Not everything, she said, but more than she'd ever told anyone in Chicago. She cried twice and apologized for crying, and I told her not to apologize, and I meant it. She told me she'd been seeing a therapist, had been for a year and a half, and that the therapy was part of why she'd finally gotten to a place where she could imagine telling me, but that imagining and doing were different, and she kept postponing the doing, because she was afraid of what my face would do. "What was your face doing?" she asked with a small, nervous laugh. "Tonight, while you were telling me?" "Yeah." I thought about it honestly. "It looked like someone learning something they should have been trusted with sooner," I said. "But I wasn't angry. I was sad for you, and I was trying to understand." She looked at me for a long moment. "That's a good face," she said quietly. We stayed together. I want to be direct about that, because I know some of you are waiting to hear it. We stayed together, and the months that followed were different from the months before, not worse. Actually better, because something between us shed its formality. She started talking about Atlanta in small pieces. Not monologues, but mentions, references, the way you integrate the past once you decided it doesn't have to be hidden. I started being more honest about my own anxieties, my own tendency to build internal narratives instead of asking questions. I visited Meridian with her on a Wednesday evening in November. Jonah turned out to be exactly as boring and collegial as a program director, as small nonprofit, has any right to be. He shook my hand and made a self-deprecating joke about grant writing and went back to his desk. I spent 2 hours helping sort donated clothing with a group of volunteers who range in age from 20 to 70 and all seemed to know Maya by name. Watching her in that space was different from watching her in our space. She was the same person, same warmth, same ease, but the work seemed to organize something in her. She helped a young woman with 2 kids navigate a form, and I watched her explain something 3 times with the same patience each time. And I thought, there it is. That's the part of the fire I wasn't seeing. The hidden life wasn't a betrayal. It was a wound that had become a purpose. And she'd kept it private because the most important things are often the ones we're most afraid to lose by exposing. Here's what I know now that I didn't know when this started. Knowing someone takes longer than we want it to. We fall in love with the presented surface. First, the smile, the wit, the way someone makes us feel in a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. And then, if we're lucky and if we do the work, we earn our way slowly into the interior. not through investigation or demand, but through consistency and safety, through being the kind of person who makes it feel possible to be known. She was afraid I'd see the wound and see only the wound, that I'd define her by her hardest chapter rather than by the full and complicated person she'd spent years building from its ruins. I think about that fear sometimes, and I understand it. We all have a hardest chapter. Most of us keep it behind a door, and only open the door for people we're sure won't rearrange everything they know about us based on what they find. She tested the door. She'd been testing it since we met, leaving it slightly ajar, then closing it, then slightly ajar again, measuring my responses, my follow me, my midnight searches, my sitting outside her building in the cold. All that was me testing the door too, not with honesty, with fear. I was afraid of what I didn't know. So I went looking in the dark instead of turning on a light and asking. We both could have done it better. We both did it as well as we knew how at the time. That's what love actually looks like, I think, under the weight of real living. Not a clean story, not a perfect trust fall. Two people, both carrying things, both trying, both making the choice repeatedly in big moments and small ones, in long Saturday conversations and late-night texts, and Wednesday evenings spent sorting donated coats to stay. She still has the drawer, the key still works, and the coffee table is still fixed. Before you go, this story, like all the stories we tell on this channel, is about the spaces between people, the gaps we leave because we're afraid, the assumptions we build because asking feels too dangerous, the hidden lies we carry, not out of malice, but out of self-protection. Maya's secret wasn't a betrayal. It was a boundary, and there's a difference. But Daniel's fear wasn't irrational either. When someone we love withholds something, even something innocent, it shakes the ground we thought was solid. If this story resonated with you, maybe it's because you've been on one side of it or both. Maybe you're the person holding something behind the door, waiting to feel safe enough to open it. Or maybe you're the person standing on the other side, sensing something without knowing what. Either way, you're not alone. And neither were they. Every relationship has a hidden room. The question is never whether it exists. It's whether love becomes a key. If this story moved you, here's what I need you to do right now. Like this video, it takes 1 second, and it tells the algorithm that real, human stories matter. Subscribe to Hidden Stories by Banki every week. We bring you stories that are raw, real, and impossible to forget. Hit the bell so you never miss one. Comment below, have you ever discovered a hidden side of someone you loved? Did it change things? Drop your story in the comments. This community is built on honesty, and your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Share this video with one person, a friend, a partner, a sibling, someone who you think needs to hear that love is complicated, and that complicated doesn't mean broken. New stories drop every day. I'll see you in the next one.